projects don't have to last forever. They just have to last longer than I do, which as the years go by is a shorter and shorter span. Well, hello, this is Brian. Today's topic, preliminaries and contingencies. At least that's what Rose and I call it. To be more accurate, though, you'd probably have to say preliminaries, contingencies, and related actions. Actions relating to whatever you're focused on for the day. It might be a project, might be an event, but they're pretty much ingrained in much of what we do. So what do you do about it? Well, first, they're not all bad. It's not like they're the three horsemen of the apocalypse or anything. Well, the retaining wall project progresses. I think we've got 6 stones at the base of our pyramid now, and we keep working down the trench. And we finished digging up the electrical, following the path of the electrical wire so we know where it's going to cross, and sure enough, they didn't put it very deep. Yeah, we ran into a common problem that both DIYers and resellers run into, what Rose and I call preliminaries and contingencies. In order to hand truck those manor stones around the corner of the barn here, there was another retaining wall that the previous owners put in that was collapsing and failing for a couple reasons. One, they had only put one board high, so the gravel was falling out from underneath it. But the other was that they didn't even use pressure treated. And you see how this narrows down here? There's barely enough room to get in here with a hand truck from here to here. So when I was dropping off the trailer down at the end of the driveway and then bringing the blocks up, this section right here had broken right out. So every time that heavy block and a hand truck would fall onto that gravel, a little more gravel would slough off the bank. So in order to get the next load, we decided it was time to do the replacement on this retaining wall. Here you can see the condition of it. Let me use my shadow here. But yeah, it wasn't even pressure treated, so it was basically crumbling to nothing. And then they had an insufficient height to hold back. So what we did was we came in again with some of that material left over from a canceled project in Seebeck that came down from the old house. We decided to use a bunch of 2x8 pressure treated boards to put in a new wall. So I don't know, we're probably looking at 35 feet long. And if you come back over and look from the back side, you can see that it goes into the bank. In some places it's 2 boards high, in some places it's 3. But now I'll be able to bring the hand truck through where my shadow's going, which is the shortest distance to move the blocks from a parked trailer around the corner. But you see, it was so steep here. It's 3 boards in this section. Dropped right off. Which points out a different flaw with this building. The flaw, of course, was that neither of those retaining walls should be needed. The people from Arizona who originally laid this place out and had that building built, for some odd reason, set its grade about 3 foot higher, maybe 4 foot higher than the road out front. So the driveway slopes up to it, which when it's icy is a problem in itself. Then they perched it on top of a mound of gravel when they poured the concrete slab that drops off quickly on both sides. They should have lowered that building about 3 feet. And before the building was ever built, when they made the flat spot to put it up and pour the concrete, they could have come past the building, cut the bank using a backhoe, and built a proper large retaining wall before they ever put the building up. That way they'd have had the full width to the property line to go around. You could pull a car right up front. Now when you pull a car up, it has to park on the slope. And then they turn the roof so that it's dumping water, freezing rain, right onto the driveway instead of down onto the sides, away from the place where people are going to come and go with a vehicle. But Rose and I are trying to deal with such issues that we inherited. But it brings me back to the point of preliminaries and contingencies. Now this is something that affects resellers regularly. Rose and I began using that term back when we were building that first house on the property, the log house, clearing the land, setting up the gardens and the outbuildings. And if we could divide that in half, preliminaries are things you decide need to be done before the project you're focused on can start. Say you want to go do an auction pickup or go garage sailing, but you haven't emptied the car. Well, having to empty the car before you go is a preliminary. And it happens all the time. You go to use your photo area and you realize that you've got a bunch of stuff stacked up on top of it, and not the stuff you actually want to photograph. So you've got to clear your photo bench before you can start your photos. You want to ship, you want to send out the solds, but your packing bench has been turned into a photo area so that you can't get there without clearing it. Or the last batch you left stacked in the passageway prevents you from getting to what you want to. So anyway, those are preliminaries, things you've got to do before you can do the item you want to do or need to do. Contingencies, even though it's not quite the correct use of the term, contingencies are what we call the idea that as long as I'm doing this, I might as well do that because they're related in some manner. For instance, you want to go do an auction pickup and you're like, oh, that'll put us really close to the Costco. So let's plan on shopping on the way home. We'll go to do the pickup, then we'll go to Costco. In the case of my retaining wall projects, my focus is the Manor Stone retaining wall. My preliminary is, of course, to go get and take the salvage bricks from the other property. So we're salvaging the bricks from one location to use them here. So those are the preliminaries, the pulling them up over there, the transporting them before I can actually stack them. The contingency is that I couldn't get the bricks around the corner without collapsing and sloughing off the gravel from that badly built retaining wall. So we consumed an entire day yesterday rebuilding that wooden retaining wall. They had driven in the T-posts and they had used the T-posts to hold up the boards, but they went through all that effort without even bothering to use pressure treated wood. Hopefully now that we've redone it and we use more wood, come up a little higher, use pressure treated, it'll last the rest of our lives. Projects don't have to last forever, they just have to last longer than I do, which as the years go by is a shorter and shorter span. If I was doing it 5 years from now, I could probably save some money and skip using pressure treated because the distance or the length it had to survive would be less and less. It brings me to the second point, which is resellers are essentially recyclers. In the case of our project, we're picking up stone from one place, we're reusing it. The wood for that project that we worked on yesterday came from a canceled project up in Seebeck. It was stored in the Quonset hut, along with a bunch of other wood which we used to build the lofts here. I had originally intended to put up a 26-foot shed, a lean-to with a back, to put the sawmill under. And the sawmill was long enough that it was designed to cut 20-foot logs. So I figured if I built a shed, 24-foot, 26-foot, but it had to have an open front so that the skid steer could bring in logs. So I needed a giant carrying beam, a couple of them actually. So they were stored, the beams were stored inside the Quonset hut, and they're now the LVL carrying beams that hold the loft up in the green shed. Because I wanted a clear span, I wanted to go across the 24-foot width of that building without posts. So I needed some pretty hefty beams. When we made the decision to move, all that material I had collected, the metal roof, the rafters, the back wall, posts, all that material wasn't needed. It was surplus. So it was brought down here or given to my son-in-law. The metal went to my son-in-law. The posts went to my son-in-law. But the beams and the 2x8s, which were going to be the back wall framing, because it was going to be somewhat exposed to the weather, they came down here because I knew I had a project for them. It's just taken me a while to work my way down the list to that project. But yeah, if you think about it, it doesn't matter whether you're buying new old stock at a garage sale or whether you're getting retail arbitrage out of a Walmart or discontinued discounted items, shelf pulls, unless you're the original creator of the object, like maybe you're a knitter and you're making afghans or sweaters, or you're a woodworker and you're making birdhouses, jewelry boxes, whether you're a jewelry artisan crafting silver, unless you're the original creator of that object, you're probably handling and reselling mostly pre-owned, used, or unopened old stock. So you're a recycler. You're taking items that weren't sold originally for some reason, or were sold used and are now pre-owned, and you're putting them back into the market. You're finding a new owner for them. So you're recycling, or you're upcycling. You're taking something that was no longer useful for its original intended purpose, you're turning it into something else. So resellers are essentially recyclers, and I think they serve a useful purpose. They take a lot of negative heat, especially on comments on YouTube channels about how they're ruining it for the poor, how they're stripping the shelves of the best stuff at the local resale stores. But I think the reality is that in our culture, we have so much waste. We produce so much in the way of goods, some of which are of questionable original value in the first place. But whatever you're into, whether it be Funko Pops or Barbies or jewelry, you're taking stuff from an estate. The person who originally enjoyed it probably had so much that they didn't even use that jewelry often. But you're taking those items. We used to clear woodworking workshops, metalworking shops, and we'd get those tools, and if they were still serviceable, we'd get them on to the next user or the next owner. So I think overall, in the balance of things, we're doing a good thing. And if you do it well, you're making a little bit of money profit for yourself, for your family, for your community, and certainly for the tax man at all levels of government, helping to patch potholes in your local road by paying your gas tax when you're out sourcing, or whether you're paying your county tax to fund your firefighting and your ambulance services, or your federal taxes, your business taxes at the state level. You're paying everybody a cut of the taxes. And you're doing that because you're doing an efficient job as a reseller. Now, wherever you are on the scale of efficiency, we're always striving to get better. But as soon as you sell your first item, you're a reseller. When you sell your thousandth item, you're still a reseller. When you incorporate and become an LLC or a small company, or even as a doing business as like we are, you're a reseller. And you're doing something useful. Don't ever forget that. I've got to head into town a little later this morning, and Rose tells me it's going to hit 90 degrees. So she's out watering some of the plants that are going to need it. Going to town on a 90-degree day is a good thing. Maybe I'll stop at the book stash and see what they've got that I might be able to recycle and resell. Well, hello, this is Brian. Today's topic, preliminaries and contingencies. At least that's what Rose and I call it. To be more accurate, though, you'd probably have to say preliminaries, contingencies, and relateds. Actions. Actions relating to whatever you're focused on for the day. Might be a project, might be an event. And this is not a new concept. Rose and I started using P&C, preliminary and contingency, using that term back when we started building our first house, the log house, because we noticed, especially on a project of that scope, that we could spend days sometimes working up to whatever it was we felt was the next phase of the project. But on a smaller scale, it happens to all of us. especially if you're a reseller. Preliminaries, of course, those are the things that have to occur or should occur before your project actually starts. For me, in my bailiwick, that's typically the planning. Maybe you got to place a pre-order. Maybe you've got to do a drawing. You've got to work out the organization that leads up to the project. But it doesn't have to be actually related to the project. Could be you've got to look up some reference information before you list, because it's a new category, something you haven't dealt with. So preliminaries, all the things that you do that consume time that lead up to what you're focused on. All right, contingencies. Now, this is a classic for Rose. That woman's superpower is trying to pack too many things into a given time frame. She always thinks we can accomplish more than we actually can, or she hopes we do. So she's always got contingency planning in the works. If we're running ahead of schedule, if traffic's light, we're on our way to Renton to do an auction pickup, but traffic moves along at a good pace, maybe we don't stop for fast food, we go into a sit-down restaurant. Maybe we take a walk in a park. For me, it's a little different. For me, it has to do with more of a time-saving element. And this is true of everybody, I guess. It takes about 45 minutes for me to drive from the house to the point on Interstate 5 where I have to go north to one auction house or south to another. So that's 45 minutes of drive time in each direction just to get to the split in the road. So if I can synchronize my pickups so that I can do both of them, I've effectively saved 45 minutes twice because I don't have to do the other pickup on a different day. So for me, contingency, those are things you can fit in when you have a little extra time, when things are going well. But for us, related items are usually there's, again, some element that we're going to save time. We're going to benefit by doing the second item at the same time as the first item. Maybe we've pulled a bin and we notice the bin's getting a little light. So we say, well, before we start refilling that bin, maybe we should do an inventory, a spot check, and see if they're all still listed on eBay. So we've decided to do an additional action, which isn't actually related to the first one, but because of the situation or the circumstances, we decide it's a good time to do it. Now, I'm going to use my retaining wall projects as an example because yesterday we worked on a retaining wall, but we spent the whole day doing a contingency plan. So right now I'm waiting for an appointment. I've got a few extra minutes, so I'm going to go in and then we'll pick this up back at the house. Preliminaries, contingencies, and related actions. We've talked about what they are, so what do you do about it? Well, first, they're not all bad. It's not like they're the three horsemen of the apocalypse or anything, but they're pretty much ingrained in much of what we do, and for a practical reason. Most of us see resources, time, money, as limited. So if by doubling up your events, doing two things at the same time can save you some time or some fuel, then you're all for it. So it doesn't really become a problem until it keeps you from achieving your goals. The wind's blowing in from the lake and it's beginning to make the camera move a little bit on this telescoping tripod. But until it reaches the level where it stops you from accomplishing your deadlines, your goals, roll with it. You're normally doing it because it's saving you, or at least the perception of saving you some effort, such as my example of driving down and doing two auctions instead of one. Be aware of it though, because sometimes, especially in the distraction group, you can go down a rabbit hole or see a baby squirrel, and you can be so distracted. You can be so distracted that you don't actually achieve anything on your to-do list. You end up doing something completely different. And I've had days where doing that can still be a wonderful event. The thing you end up doing turns out to be better than the thing you had planned. But some of us work on deadlines, and it's one of the funny things about watching YouTube content creators. Some of my favorite channels to watch, they're always creating these goals, these artificial deadlines. Maybe they say we're going to get 50 listings up today, even though they know for practical purposes they've rarely ever gotten 50 listings up in any given day. So they're kind of setting their expectations up a little too high, and if they put too much emphasis on that, they can end up, having a downer, depressing day. I mean, what is it that people think they're really fooling their brains? If I make an artificial deadline or I make an artificial goal and I burn out trying to achieve it, it means the next day I'm probably not going to come close because I don't even want to go near listing. So yeah, people use those little tricks to try to create drama and anxiety and maybe pat themselves on the back for achieving something. Because reselling can be a solitary game. Unless you work with a partner who is ready to applaud your actions and you're ready to applaud theirs, there's nobody really standing there saying, good job. You just plug away at it day in and day out. And that's the way it is for most of us who work alone at small businesses and don't interact directly with the public. But sometimes the whole P&C thing, it can be beneficial. It causes you to get to things that have a low priority. If you put a quick patch on something like my retaining wall example, I could have just taken the 2-foot section that had broken, put in a 3-foot board jammed behind there, shoveled a little of the gravel back, patched it, and gone about doing my primary goal. And sometimes those patches work just fine. Sometimes they get used entirely too long, because the fact that you've solved that problem, that immediate problem, and you can turn your attention back to what you were supposed to be doing, it defers that other work for quite some time. And summer can be like that. I mentioned prioritizing is like whack-a-mole, like playing a whack-a-mole game in another one of my videos, because as problems pop up all summer long, whack, those are the ones that get enough attention, or those are the ones that get attention, but they only get enough attention to momentarily drive that mole back in the game hole. He pops back up a few minutes later, and putting a patch on that wall would have been very similar. I'd already patched it once when we first moved in, a different section, 8 foot of it, and I could have just patched what was failed. But when I took a good look at that untreated wood that you saw piled up on the driveway, I could see that whole retaining wall was not long for this world. So Rose and I made a decision to spend the day. We thought it might take 2, but we actually managed to push through the heat and finish it in 1. The material was already staged here. It was in the shade for part of the day, but it was something that needed attention. So when you've got preliminaries, contingencies, and relateds going on, just look at each one of them and decide whether they're worth it. Is it worth interrupting your plans for the day to deal with them? Some of them are very beneficial, like pre-planning a project that has some complications, pre-ordering items, getting the knowledge you need, maybe from a YouTube channel, to take on that project before the material arrives and it's kickoff day. So planning, I've always been a believer in the idea that pre-planning multi-day, multi-hour, long, large projects often saves you the time, and you recover more time by doing the planning than you ever would by losing the time it took to do the planning. But watch out for those rabbit holes. You can sit down to do one thing, and you go down that rabbit hole, and 2, 3, 4 hours later, you say, wow, where did the day go? Well, I need to go do some things before I say, where did my day go? I got back from town. I did pick up a few free books, only about this many this time. So somebody had picked over the boxes early this morning, and it was a good day. Now it's time to get something to eat, do some packing, then maybe some listing. Well, I realized when I was looking at this in editing that I misspoke and used the word artesian instead of artisan. Artisan, of course, is what I use to refer to those crafters who make jewelry or pottery, woodworking. Artists who make things. I prefer that to homemade or handmade, especially when I'm doing a listing. Artesian, of course, is typically used for a natural wellspring. Take a guy like Andy Warhol, who turned the creating of art into a warehouse operation with interns, and he was so prolific that he could be an artesian artisan. But, that's just a bit of side humor. So preliminaries and contingencies, the interesting thing about them is that they can consume more time than the actual project you're focused on. You can spend the whole day just getting ready for the project you had planned and never get to it. Sometimes the preliminaries and contingencies are longer in duration than the actual project. And I've had many days like that, and I don't worry about it too much because I generally just think of it as it's all work that needs to be done. It's just not necessarily the way it unfolds and the way the day happens when you're making your plans in the morning over coffee. But try not to get too upset when it does happen and just roll with it.